Welcome to the inner world of filmmaking. I'm your host, Tammy Magaro. I'm an editor, podcaster, and still photographer. In this show, I will interview filmmakers in all facets of production and distribution. Today's guest is David Max Steinberg, who is a filmmaker and adjunct professor at San Diego State University, Department of Theater, Film, and Television, and USC School of Cinematic Arts. Welcome to the show, David.
Hey, good morning.
So I like to always start off with, what was your journey into the film world?
It kind of started when I was about 8 years old. My cousin had been a part of a 60 Minutes special where they went to a school and gave 10 children movie cameras and a certain amount of film and asked the kids to make a movie. And long story short, my cousin made one, was selected to be on this 60 Minutes show, and she won a little Super 8 movie camera, which I still have up there. And we started making little movies at 8 years old. But in a professional sense, that was when I was 17. I started as a film loader. And a commercial from New York came to shoot in San Diego, and I helped a young cinematographer named Nancy Schreiber, who's gone on and since become an ASC member and wonderful cinematographer. And I ran after Nancy Schreiber basically in Balboa Park as she was filming a sporting event, a race. And so we're sort of running along with racers and having to get ahead of them, kind of cutting across the racetrack to get angles as they approached. And I was carrying a big bag full of film and a changing bag. So that was my first professional job. And that's kind of where it started.
Now, you went to school in San Diego, and then you also went to school in New York.
Yeah, I went to...
For film.
Yes, exactly. I went to UCSD in the visual arts department and studied film there. And the school had sort of a bias towards art film and documentary and wasn't particularly interested in narrative film, which I was. So after going to UCSD, I applied to the other schools, ended up going to NYU for graduate school because I knew they were very high on narrative film and entertainment, and which is what I wanted to do. So I had also applied to USC and to UCLA, and I got accepted at USC, but at the time I was married. We decided to go to New York because my other half wanted to be in the theater, and New York was the place for people in the theater, I gather. So that's where we went.
Now, did you stay there for a while and make films there after you graduated?
Yeah, I stayed in New York. I graduated in 85. And I'd made a feature film actually as my thesis at NYU. Believe it or not, I got picked up by a distributor and blown up to 35. That was all very exciting. And but after that high of that initial experience, I stayed in New York for about 8 years and worked as a DP there, doing commercials and basically anything I could get employed for. And in that process, I was able to join NABIT, the union, smaller union at the time. And then at a later date, I was able to join IA.
Then you moved to LA, didn't you?
Yeah, I finally moved to LA in the 80s when the writer's strike happened because New York got very, very slow. And a lot of people were moving to Los Angeles and trying to at least stay working that way. So I moved to LA, and actually I had kind of a zigzaggy path, but I went to Atlanta first after living in Manhattan. And I worked in Atlanta directing and shooting television commercials for a production company there. After that's when I moved to Los Angeles. Yeah, it's been a little zigzagging back and forth because I had job connections in New York, yet I moved out to Los Angeles and that sort of.
So what brought you, how long were you in Atlanta for?
For just 3 years. I went there, but all I could really get work doing was regional television commercials, which wasn't of much interest to me. And it was kind of interesting because at the time, lots of production companies from LA would come to Atlanta to shoot to avoid the union cost. So I would watch all my friends down there who worked in production get gigs on films that would come to town like RoboCop and Driving Miss Daisy. And there was a whole slew of films that were coming out of Atlanta at that time. But they would always bring their DP and their director and their production office from Los Angeles. So I finally decided I wasn't going to really get the challenges I wanted in Atlanta. and moved to LA. And it was within 1 month of getting to LA that I got this job shooting a feature for Menachem Golan of Canon Films, the Canon group, people who were doing all those action films in the 80s, like Rambo and Chuck Norris movies. And so I got this experience shooting like a real movie that had a real budget, with kind of a legendary hard-ass director. He's kind of like Roger Corman without any of the soft edges. So that was kind of interesting, but it was boot camp for me as a young cinematographer and really a fun experience. So, and where was the film shooting? Atlanta. So I got to go back and employ all my friends to be on the crew.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really nice.
And you also did music videos. I mean, you've done commercials, films, music videos, and I know that you've worked with the greats like Prince and Miles Davis. I mean, how was that?
Yeah, well, actually, those two artists I was doing basically second unit work for, so I wasn't shooting the primary performance element of the videos, so they would have other things. So I didn't get to rub elbows with either of those two. Music videos were, the thing in the late 80s that people were doing when they were getting into business. And I was lucky because I had been shooting enough where I was able to get jobs photographing these things. And, it was a really good experience because you get to try a lot of unusual things and you aren't bogged down by the restraints of continuity and recording performances. You're just dealing with people miming in playback. So
Right, yeah. I would think that that's a different style. Obviously, music to commercial work and also film, all very different genres.
Yeah.
I've noticed that a lot of filmmakers then become teachers. And I was just curious, what are the requirements to become an adjunct professor and what made you start teaching?
One thing I did well in my 20s was, or did wisely, was make the decision to get the master's because in film, as you probably know, I briefed myself on your resume, and you're a filmmaker as well. There's a burnout phase that happens when you get in your 50s and 60s. You're not really sort of ripe for production. Most of the work is done by young people. You may have blown out your back by that time. And so I think it's a natural progression to move into teaching. But at that time in my 20s, I was able to foresee that, there might be a time when I got tired of being on the road, being a gypsy on productions and wanted to have a more reliable, stable and type life. So I had a mature vision of the future and decided to get the master's degree because there really wasn't any reason to do that. Didn't it make me any more employable, I don't think. Your experience, your work resume is totally different from your film school education, and I'm not sure that there was any real reason why to go to the graduate school except for to get a degree for teaching.
Yeah.
And I knew for most teaching positions they want somebody to have an MFA. I don't think it's a requirement though. There's a professor at San Diego State who teaches cinematography as well, and I don't believe he has a master's degree.
Wow. Yeah, because I was kind of curious, if somebody, I know an editor that was doing feature films and now is just working at UCLA teaching editing. It's such a great role because you're a mentor to so many students. So what's the most rewarding thing about teaching?
Oh, man. I don't have kids, so this is kind of my supplement for having my own family.
Right.
But, I get these incredible letters or messages from students, even like years after the fact. They'll say, hey, but I've had some students, like one of my students last semester got best screenplay in a small competition, local competition, and she shouted out, a thank you because I had helped her kind of as a story editor with her script before she shot it. So those kind of things, when you don't have your own kids, are just heartwarming. And, you also feel like all of this knowledge that you have, what's the point of hanging on to it? I don't have to compete for work these days. If I want to work, that's great. So there's no reason to not just put the concentration on mentoring and giving away the secrets and passing on the knowledge that, some of us may have had working from when it was still film.
Right.
And not an electronic medium.
Right, yeah. can you walk us down the schools? Like, how did you start? You've worked at USC, UCSD, SDSU. Which one came first? And, how did you go to each of the schools?
Yeah. Well, I was living on, believe it or not, I was living on Martha's Vineyard for a short period of my life. I was thinking of raising a family, and I had gotten divorced and decided I wanted to get the heck off of that rock. So I came back to San Diego, where my father was and where I'd spent a lot of time as a kid. Basically, met up with a friend of mine who was at that time, the area head at San Diego State Film Department. So, by good fortune of knowing someone in that school, I had a little bit of an entree, but I had asked him to keep an eye out, and if there were an opportunity to teach cinematography and lighting at the school in any capacity, I'd be overjoyed. And lo and behold, within a few months, that became the case. So it provided a stepping stone and a job for me to make that move to get off the island and move to San Diego with a job place. So that was the first thing. But, my friend was only so influential. It's that you get the job by committee. So, I had to supply a certain amount of written material and biography material and demo reel and these kind of things as well before they actually appointed me. But I got this foot in the door.
Yeah. And then did you go to, I know that you were the program advisor for UCSD. Did you also teach there?
Yeah, UCSD Extension is their continuing education department. They have a facility called the Digital Arts Center, and they wanted to start a certificate program, sort of 1 year intensive study for video production, essentially. And so people who were maybe changing their career later in life, or who for whatever reason, wanted to study video but didn't want to go to a 3-year film school, could enroll in their course and have a sort of soup to nuts education in producing video. And so I got the job there to essentially design the curriculum for what that class would be and advise them on, what kind of cameras they should buy and equipment they should have for these students to start out making films and editing films on their own. So that was a lot of fun.
I bet. Creating the curriculum, how fun is that? So how did you get that job?
Well, I was recommended by a professor who was already there teaching in some other capacity. He knew me from San Diego State, and he recommended me. And then I met with basically the director of the program and a couple other administrative people and was interviewed and, basically interviewed and that was it to get the job. So they trusted me a lot.
Yeah.
To design the school and advise them on how to spend their money, essentially.
And then how long did you do that for?
3 years. 3 years. And then I wanted to, an opportunity opened up back at San Diego State. And I wanted to take advantage of that because I was teaching film again, narrative cinema. And that was more attractive to me than teaching this kind of videography class, basically, that we made up at UCSD. So I got back to San Diego State, and it was from maybe about 4 or 5 years teaching San Diego State, then I decided I wanted to aim a little higher. Started looking into trying to apply to the LA schools.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever work for UCLA?
No, not UCLA, just USC. For this last year, I've been working for USC as an associate adjunct professor, and I've taught 2 courses there so far. One was actually on production for multicam live audience productions like sitcoms, where there's 4 or 5 cameras, and you have to light with the restrictions of using those Fisher booms that put the microphones out above the actors. You have to be very careful to avoid shadow casting. So there's kind of a formulaic lighting. That's kind of why the sitcoms all look the same. That has to be applied so you don't have these microphones causing problems for the cameras. And that class was co-taught with 4 professors, a directing professor, Robert Schiller, who's Emmy-winning TV director, and then Nancy Forner, who's the head of the editing department at USC. She would advise on the post-production of the sitcom, editing of the sitcom. And I was hired as a cinematographer to talk to the students about camera work side and lighting side of it. And then there was a writing teacher as well. So it was team taught, which was kind of unusual and kind of exciting. And then I took over teaching a advanced cinematography class for Chris Conim, who's an ASC member. He's a great cinematographer. And he was teaching the advanced class, and he got a film in Mexico. And I was asked to come in basically as a substitute and teach for the rest of the semester, which is really a lot of fun.
Is that like one day a week that you just drive up there to teach the course?
Yes, exactly. The sitcom was more demanding. It was usually like one day a week and then also on a number of the weekends. So that was a little bit more of a commute. But Chris's class would meet once a week for 4 hours, and the students were pretty seasoned young cinematographers. So they would actually present a lookbook of what they wanted to achieve when they had their shoots. They were shooting with Panavision equipment, 35 millimeter film, and they would have to basically pitch a visual that they wanted to create and capture on the sound stage. Then the next week they would have to go and actually shoot it with their classmates in the other capacities as gaffer and this and that. And it was pretty neat, high level, they were doing a lot of very creative things. And USC is so well equipped, they have like 8 fully equipped sound stages. San Diego State has sort of one limping along sound stage. So, the students are able to do big things, in the control of a sound stage, and they have all the lighting gear that you could possibly want. So, it's like being able to play with all the toys in the toy box for a teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because I got accepted to that school and didn't go when I was 20, it was like just really a great circularity to be teaching there, even though I didn't get to attend there. So
I know.
Yeah.
How cool is that? Yeah.
It was fun. Yeah.
Are you looking to also eventually teach at UCLA if you could?
Yeah. Well, I'm not actively yet because I'm kind of putting all my eggs into the USC basket. But yeah, I would be very interested in teaching there or Chapman because I gather both of those schools have great film departments.
Oh, yeah. How do you navigate your time between filming, because you still do projects, right, and teaching?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of limited with respect to projects. I usually get to do maybe one or to 3 a year, short films generally, because the commitment is small and I have all these students coming out who are making short films and whatnot, so it's kind of fun. I oftentimes get to collaborate with them. But, I'm not actively in the union anymore. I'm in honorable withdrawal because it's not worth it to me paying dues when I'm not seeking work and working professionally that often. Most of my time these days is taken up between teaching and enjoying life and my new dog who's very demanding.
Yeah.
So, I'm just exploring other areas of my life. I'm a pianist, so I'm doing a lot of fun playing music these days and concentrating on some of the other arts that I like to do as well as cinematography. Problem with cinematography is you can't do it alone.
Yeah.
You got to have a show. So
Right. Yeah. Anything that you'd like to share that you're working on now?
Well, I just finished a film called Nanobots, The Fantastic Journey, documentary actually, that a former grad student produced. And it's basically trying to function as a educational for the layman about nanoscience and nanobots, because it's been popularized in kind of a dystopian way in the culture, in movies and things like that as a threat. And it's really probably going to be one of the largest scientific advancements that comes along, and yet we don't know anything about it except for what we see in these action films. And there's, legitimate things to be concerned about, and there's also a lot of things to be excited about. So my former student, Robert, who's a good producer, wanted to make something that was kind of entertaining, but on that subject to educate. And it's PBS type project. It was edited for that slot by a PBS editor, and hopefully he'll be getting some distribution for it real soon. But it's a very easy, watchable, entertaining, because he was able to use a lot of clips from old movies and current movies that reference nanobots, And yeah.
Can you define what nanobots are for people that may not know?
Sure. Nanobots are just, I guess a nanometer is, well, I don't know the math of it, but basically these are incredibly tiny particles, like a billionth of the human hair or something silly like that have application in a lot of areas. In particular, a particular interest is medicine, where they are hoping that these nanobots can enter the bloodstream and be used to deliver drugs, for instance, to a particular area of the body or to a tumor. Lots of other applications in the industries as well, but the real hope is that they are going to be a big part of medicine in treating disease in the future. And I'm just sort of, I was a cinematographer, so I was listening to these interviews, kind of fascinated, but I should be able to recount more what they are. They're little tiny robots.
Yeah. Oh, probably just like, well, go see the film when it comes out.
That's it. The intentional ploy to get you all to watch it.
Yeah. So any last words of wisdom to our viewers who are considering going to film school, or a filmmaker considering going to teaching? I know that's two very different questions, but any last words?
Yeah, well, I definitely I'm excited for filmmakers these days because it's so much easier to produce a film than it used to be. So much less cumbersome, and if you have a camera and a laptop, you're pretty close to there. So I'm encouraged the opportunities there, but I would still encourage students to go to film school if they're really, really excited about film, and if they want to teach it. I think it's important to have been to a film school so you kind of know how they approach it, what they do in a film school. And in my case, if I hadn't been smart at 21 to think, should I go to graduate school in film, or is this just wasting time? I should get out there and make money. If I didn't have that smarts, I wouldn't have these great opportunities that I have now, of having gotten a master's degree.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It was my pleasure. I hope I was able to contribute something of value.
Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to get out there and make a film. Reach out to your local filmmakers group to get involved and connect. Please subscribe to the show if you like it, and follow me on Instagram at Tammy Magaro. Until we meet again, what's your story?